Brexit was impossible, Donald Trump's election was impossible, and yet both have now become reality. My election to the presidency has been dubbed impossible for months now. It's up to the people to make it possible. My impression is that now a phase begins where the people really rethink. Where the people rethink and say, we want our Austria back. We want it back. The only terrorism is coming from Brussels and Wall Street. But if the British didn't fall for it and the Americans didn't fall for it, I don't think the Italians will either. Yes, we're in favour of a new political start worldwide because we believe what Merkel and company have damaged not only here but also in Europe and in the world doesn't help.
Well, those are the voices of political leaders here in Europe who want to basically tear everything down that is known as the European Union. Anti-establishment populists are enjoying their biggest surge in support in decades. After Britain's decision to go ahead with Brexit and the election of Donald Trump as U.S. president, their attention, or the attention of populist forces has now focused on Europe. Next year, national elections will take place here in Germany, France, and in the Netherlands. Right-wing parties smell victory at the ballot box. Well, why is that? Well, the Bertelsmann Foundation has polled 15,000 people across Europe about their views on the world, and well, you're going to see here the results are troubling. Almost half of EU citizens see globalization as a threat. Now, the most skeptical nations are France and Austria, the ones you see here in the darker red. Even in the export powerhouse Germany, its economy depends on globalization. 45% asked say that globalization is a danger. Now, 47% of the people who do not want globalization, they say that they would vote to leave the EU. A lot of Brexits there. Only 9% say that they trust politicians. 9%. 38% say that they were satisfied with democracy itself. And there you have it. Do they think their country has too many foreigners? 57% say yes. Those are some disturbing numbers, and, you know, they're valid on both sides of the Atlantic. We want to talk about that. Joining me here at the big table now is Jackson James. He's the president of the American Institute for Contemporary German Studies at Johns Hopkins University in Washington. Jack, it's good to have you here on the day. And joining us live from Washington is Yascha Mounk, a lecturer on government at Harvard University. He's about to publish research showing democracies are indeed weaker than we may think. Welcome to both of you. Jackson, let me start with you. You have come to Europe this week, and everywhere you go, you were telling me earlier, people want an explanation. They want to know, how did Trump happen? What do you tell them?
For the same reasons that you just explained. There are just exactly the same kind of developments going on in the United States as there are in Europe. A backlash against elites, a fear of the future, anxiety about globalization. Yes, you mentioned as well fear about immigrants and things of that sort. There is anxiety out there and, unfortunately, a lack of trust in leadership, and those two things are poisonous.
Yascha, the question of Trump is not such a puzzle where you are in the United States. People, they will say they knew what they were voting for as a candidate, because he's a candidate who doesn't brag about his loyalty to democracy at all. Let's pick up on your research. You've come up with some clear warning signs of a democracy in decline. We want to show those to our viewers. The signs are falling support for democracy, openness to non-democratic rule. There they go. Rise of anti-system movements. Now, with the election of Trump, am I correct in saying all three are now a reality in the U.S.?
Absolutely. And it's not just with the election of Trump. That's actually started over the last 15 or 20 years. You know, I was really struck by some of the statistics that you mentioned at the beginning of the segment. Because we've known this for a long time. We've known that there's less and less confidence in politicians. We know, for example, in the United States, that 30 or 40 years ago, most Americans thought that politicians in Washington, by and large, try to do the right thing. Now it's a very small percentage of Americans who believe that. But we didn't want to see the evidence. We kept explaining it away. In the field of political science, we kept saying, you know what, perhaps citizens are just getting more demanding, more self-confident, they want more from government. So yeah, they're more critical, but they believe in the democratic system as much as they always have. And so with my colleague, Roberto Stefan, we set out to look at precisely that specific question. Well, do they actually still like democracy the way they used to? Is democracy still the only game in town in the way that political scientists talk about? And what we find is that that's simply not the case. So just to take one example, the number of citizens to whom it's really important to live in a democracy. Looking at the United States, young people born in 1980 and later, less than 1/3 of people say it's essential to them to live in a democracy. And that's a radical change from earlier, from older people, where it's more than 2/3 who used to say that.
It's disturbing, isn't it, Jack? Because you're an expert in German history, learning from the mistakes of the past. What is happening here? I mean, if people don't want to bank on living in a democracy, do they feel like there's an alternative to it?
I don't think so. I mean, I rather think that the younger people probably take a lot for granted and don't necessarily know what it means not to live with a democracy, and therefore I think...
Are they learning history, for one?
Who knows? I mean, nowadays the concentration span of people is now being extremely limited given the social media and where they get their information from, and there's an immediate sense that I'm living in the now and not in the past. But I think that basically the problem is to get back to what I said before, the trust in people, the trust in institutions, and the trust in the fact that people don't really have a sense of where their future is going. That is gone. And unfortunately, I think leaders are looking around and flailing around and trying to figure out what to say about it. But on both sides of the Atlantic, we've got a major problem.
Well, what do you say about, the Pax Americana, this transatlantic center of order that we've known for 70 years? Are we seeing it decline? Is it about to disappear?
I don't think that's going to happen in so fast, but I do think that there is a question mark about whether or not the tools of the last 70 years are still the same tools that we use to deal with the problems today, whether it's globalization, whether it's immigration. There are millions of people on the move. There is tectonic shifts all over the globe. And I think that people are just simply unsure of how to meet those challenges and make choices. And that's where we are.
I want to show both of you an example of what we've been seeing in the United States in politics. We've got a tweet from Mitt Romney from earlier in the year. Maybe if we can pull that up and show our viewers. This is what Mitt Romney said about Donald Trump back in February. Here's what I know. Donald Trump is a phony, a fraud. His promises are as worthless as a degree from Trump University. Now, I want you to juxtapose that to the pictures we've been seeing this week, and we can show those as well. Mitt Romney now is a contender for Secretary of State. There he is having dinner with Donald Trump. And when you see that, first of all, you have to think, well, this is someone who is caving in. This is a big flip-flop. Principles don't matter. And where's the anger in society that you would expect to have over behavior like this? Yascha, what do you think? Where's the anger? Why aren't we seeing that?
I mean, I think we are seeing some anger, but I want to focus on what's really important here, which is that Donald Trump is what in our research we call anti-system candidates, anti-system parties. They are people who are willing to not accept the democratic rules of the game, to go against core norms that we need in order to make liberal democracy work. The reason why Mitt Romney attacked him so forcefully throughout the campaign is that Trump did things over which you don't just have partisan differences, they are attacks on our very system. For example, threatening to jail his political opponent. For example, attacking the freedom of the press, casting doubt on the idea that he would accept the outcome of the election. Now, Donald Trump is not in office yet, and we don't know how much of his rhetoric he's going to put into practice. But if he does, it's very important that we disabuse ourselves of this notion that somehow the Constitution is going to save itself. But we have checks and balances, and so we don't have to worry. If a president starts to overstep the limits of his authority, if he starts to undermine the neutrality of state institutions,
who's going to stop him?
Like the Internal Revenue Service or the Department of Justice,
right.
The only people who can stop him are people and politicians. And the crucial force here is going to be moderate Republicans like Mitt Romney. So the fact that Mitt Romney is now caving and making nice with Donald Trump is very worrying about the health of our liberal democracy.
Exactly. I mean, you've got Mitt Romney who wants to now, maybe get on the Trump train. So who is left then to stand up for the Constitution?
But let's put it this way. I mean, if Romney and others decide to get involved in the cabinet, they may be telling themselves that they're doing that for the sake of the Republic and not for Donald Trump. In other words, to think in terms of whether or not they can make a difference in the case of Romney at the State Department.
We can only trust them, right?
We can only trust them. And that's a hard thing to do when trust is at a minimum these days.
And they have to trust...
Yeah?
And they have to trust themselves. That's the difficult thing. I actually think that Mitt Romney is a very honorable man. And I'm sure that he is doing this, not just out of personal ambition, so it's always difficult to distinguish those things, but also because he thinks he can rein Donald Trump in certain ways, make sure to present a respectable face to American foreign policy, provide some leadership and continuity. But Mitt Romney has to have defined his red lines very clearly in his own head. And he has to be able to resign as soon as Donald Trump does things that are truly worrying, before he's become so co-opted that it's not going to look credible. And as we saw with people like Colin Powell in very different circumstances in the past, that's a difficult thing to do. It's not an easy thing to do. So I'm very worried that people will start joining the Trump administration for all the right reasons, and yet in the end, because they're part of it, they will not stand up to him when it counts.
It is just another factor to be worried about, unfortunately. Yascha, Mounk in Washington, thank you very much. And to you, Jackson James, thank you very much for being on the day. We appreciate it. That's going to wrap it up for this edition of The Day. And remember, whatever happens between now and then, tomorrow is another day. We'll see you then, everybody.